Joanne Harris, welcome to the Great Big Book Club. Thank you for joining us. How are you?
I'm very well, thank you. Thank you for inviting me. How are you?
And congratulations on your fantastic new book called 10 Things About Writing. It's available in ebooks, isn't it?
It is. It came out as an ebook initially. It will come out as a hardback in December, but because the publisher wanted to bring it out at a time when people in lockdown seem to have a great appetite for writing guides and a great momentum to write things of their own for the first time in some cases, it was thought to be a better idea to bring it out as an ebook first.
And it came originally from a Twitter idea. Is that correct?
Yeah, I get a lot of ideas from Twitter in one way or another.
Well, you're the only one who does. I can't believe it.
Ha! Oh, I've written whole books on Twitter. But no, this one particularly, I think I started doing it 6 or 7 years ago. And I found that people ask me a lot of questions about how I wrote, how I approached various aspects of writing, how different things in the writing business worked, like rights, like agents, like different kinds of publishers. And I found that rather than just answer the questions individually, it was a good idea to make them public and to make them into sort of little kind of 10-tweet seminars. And I found that every day people were putting in requests. And so every day, almost every day, I would put one out. And pretty much every time I did this, somebody would go, where can I find these? Where's the book? And then there wasn't one, except that now there is.
So you started off with, so it has the contents is all obviously divided into 10 chapters, and each chapter is in 10 little sections.
Yes.
And so how did you go about designing each section, each chapter? What was the process behind all of that?
Well, I thought, first of all, to give it a sort of direction. And so I thought, well, who has been asking me these questions? And I couldn't actually get a proper answer to this, because some people were asking me because they had never written before and they wanted the courage to start. They wanted some sort of permission. And some people were authors who had been published before and who just wanted to share various ideas. And so I thought, okay, we'll start from very basic principles as I see them. And then we'll go to publication and beyond, and we'll cover things like book tours and secondary rights and foreign rights and things, because even if people don't have that as their initial objective when they're writing, it could well be that they're just curious about how it works. I don't know of any other writing books that actually do this. And I thought, well, you know, these are all things that people are curious about, so why not include them in the book?
And it's quite a practical guide, isn't it? I mean, you start off with, saying about, how your office should be, clearing your space. I mean, it's brilliant, because mostly a lot of these books that I've read over the years have been sort of quite esoteric and quite boring but this is brilliant and sharp and bright. And so you talk about, how to get your office sorted. So what sort of office? Well, let's have a look at your office. Is it sorted?
Well, no, actually, I don't say how to sort your office. What I do say is find yourself a space in which you are comfortable to work. Now, this is a different thing. Not everybody will have an office. When I wrote my first 3 books, I didn't have an office either, but I did have a headspace in which I could go. And it's really about the idea of finding yourself a workspace and getting into a headspace, which is important. It doesn't actually matter if you don't have an office or a shed or a designated workroom, but it does matter that you should know where you want to work, and you should have somewhere to go, even if it's only your car. Joanna Cannon wrote her first book just in her car at lunchtimes when she was working in the hospital. So, it is, I mean, actually, the point that I wanted to make about space was that you shouldn't wait until you have a beautifully sorted office or shed or whatever. In fact, the idea is to make the space in your head and to give yourself permission to work and to create the conditions where it's possible for you to work, whatever those conditions are for you. So actually, it's the opposite of prescriptive rules for writers. It's about how to find your way into this thing, rather than go, yes, this is what you need to do. Because actually a lot of people will want to approach things in different ways, and there is no right way to approach writing. There is only the way that worked for you. And I've tried to make this clear in the book, that some of the things I'm saying are things that work for me. They may also work for you. If they don't, then it's fine to find another way, because actually that's, that's how it goes.
But it's wonderfully gentle. I mean, right at the beginning, it says, don't try to do too much at once. Although it may be true the journey of 1,000 miles begins with a single step. Try not to think about where the journey will take you. Instead, try to focus on what you can do day to day on a day-to-day basis, which is exactly the sort of position that we're in at the moment, isn't it? It's sort of one step at a time. But I think it's what's wonderful about this book is that even if, I mean, I'm obviously being published, but and it works for writers who have been published and writers who want to be published. You do both sides of the coin, as it were.
I do hope so, because I don't actually think that there's much difference between those writers. I mean, the whole business of being published or not being published doesn't stop you being a writer. And this is one of the kind of myths about writing that I've tried to debunk in this book, this idea that there are people who are special, who are somehow fated to be published and it made them special and different. I think actually we are all on the same rather long learning curve. And if we've stopped learning, then God help us, there's obviously something wrong with what we're doing. So this idea of whether you are published or unpublished, or publication being some sort of enormous step that you need to get past, I've tried to question that a bit, because I don't think it's true. And I don't think that being published necessarily makes a difference to the quality of somebody's writing. It depends very much what you want from your writing. And I've tried to make this book accessible to people who would like to be published, but also people who don't care about publication at all, who just want to be better at what they do.
You're also brilliant about sort of puncturing the pretension of writing. There's a brilliant line in the book when it says, do write because you want to be a writer. Don't write because you want to be a writer. Write because you want to write. And there's a sort of, I've always thought there's a big difference between male and female writers in our business, and I always think female writers have to fight much harder to get their voices heard than male writers.
Well, I think that's true. I think that's always been true in the literary world, that women and men are not quite seen in the same way, that men are much more likely to be favourably received and to be reviewed in literary magazines and to be shortlisted for prizes. And men are much more likely to be seen as somebody who is speaking for the whole human experience, whereas women are much more likely to be seen as writing just for women, or writing genre, or something which to the literary world is not quite the same and doesn't have as much to say. And I've been fighting against this all my life, really, but it still exists, and it's still something that we as women writers are aware of. And for every woman who gets a literary prize, there are hundreds of others who never will, not necessarily because they're not any good, but just because they are marketed and sold in a way that kind of makes them ineligible.
There's a brilliant line also in your book where it says, top tip, real women very rarely think about their breasts at all, and certainly not how male writers do, which makes me laugh an awful lot.
There was actually a whole thread about writing breasts, which actually didn't make it into the book, but which I had a lot of fun on Twitter, which followed, I think, the Bad Sex Awards, because even highly acclaimed male literary writers tend to fall into the breast trap, and they tend to try to characterize their women characters by just making them look at their boobs in the mirror a lot, or coming up with a lot of really quite far-fetched imagery about breasts, or making them marvel that men can pee standing up. And I'm not going to name any names here, but you will find all of these in books by extremely acclaimed male novelists. And I thought that it might be useful in this book to point out that you can write women as people. You don't have to write them as a collection of body parts to remind the reader that they're a woman, because that won't remind the reader that they're a woman, but it might just remind the reader that you, the writer, are a man, which is not what you want.
No, very funny. So you're chair of the Society of Authors. And you're brilliant in this book about the business side of publishing, which, I mean, it is a business, which, and there's a very funny line in here when you talk about in your chapter was said when people let you down, and there's a line here which says, number one, always remember that however much you may like your agent or your editor or your publisher, they are doing a job, and however much they may like you, they're in this for the money, which is something that we all forget really in an odd way. It's where creativity and money come together in publishing, which isn't, when they're not very good bedfellows quite often.
No, they're not. And I think a lot of authors don't feel comfortable talking about money, don't feel comfortable asking for money, which is one of the reasons they need agents, because agents have no problem asking for money, and you've never seen a poor agent. But it is quite important to remind people of this. And I remember when I was talking about it on Twitter, I got a lot of pushback when I said this first, from people who have not yet learned that lesson, because they haven't been in publishing long enough to be let down by somebody, because they forgot that that somebody is part of a business, and that being dropped by your publisher or your agent or your editor or being let down by people is something that happens in the business. It's not a personal issue. And having seen rather more of the business than a lot of writers, and for longer, I can reiterate this. If you don't know this lesson by now, it's a good idea to learn from other people's mistakes rather than making your own. And some people won't. Some people will have to go through their own process, which is also fine. But it is quite important to remember that however you as a writer may feel about art, and it's fine, whatever you feel about it is okay to feel those things, but whoever is selling your art will not necessarily feel about it quite the same way that you do. And you have to try and think about how they are seeing your art and how they are going to have to sell it for you. Because yes, if you do want to be commercially published, you have to also accept that somebody somewhere will be thinking of your books as units rather than something that you sweated blood over for years to produce. And it is uncomfortable. Nobody likes it, but it's also real and something worth thinking about.
So you were obviously you wrote the very famous Chocolat, which was made into a movie and sold all over the world. And you're very good here about the second novel. So the idea that having had such a huge success, is it difficult to build yourself up again to have another go? What's it like having a massive success and then suddenly thinking, oh my God, here we go again?
Well, actually, I was lucky because Chocolat wasn't my first novel at all. It was my third novel.
I know, but I'm just using it as an example.
Have to do that. But there is such a thing as the curse of expectation, which I think a lot of first successful novelists do get. I think I was slightly different because I came to this slightly later, and I'd already had various experiments in writing and various failures. And also, by the time Chocolat came out, I'd already written my next novel. I didn't feel that there was this enormous amount of pressure. I think it is much easier to have your success 10, 15 years into your writing career than to have it immediately. I do feel very sorry for some of the young writers who have their big success in their 20s, because I've seen lots of them completely unable to handle it. And some of these people I had in mind when I was writing that bit about the second novel, the idea that one's expectations, particularly having had a success, because you're warned all the time against failure. You're warned to expect failure. You're told what to do if you fail. Nobody ever prepares anybody for success. Nobody ever says, okay, it could be that your book will be immensely successful, and then you will have these other problems, because of course people think of success as being something that's just pure joy. It's not really. It can be extremely stressful. And it can lead people to make some quite bad decisions about the future too. And so what I tried to do in that section was to warn people that if the big success does happen, there are things that you need to bear in mind.
And did you enjoy that ride, the Chocolat ride? Was it fun? Was it?
The further I get away from it, the more I enjoy it in retrospect.
But was it quite an intense ride? I mean, it was a huge wave of success.
Yes, it was. I have to say that I don't I don't remember the success as much as I remember reporters from the News of the World turning up outside my house, trying to follow my 4-year-old daughter to school, various members of the press saying some really astonishingly personal things about me, not having met me at all. I remember a lot of scrutiny, which I was quite uncomfortable with, because at the time I just hadn't dealt with the press. I just didn't know what it was like. But there was a lot of fun as well. But it is not necessarily an easy ride. And it's not even having a big book and a big success. It's not like winning the lottery. It is the start of a number of decisions, quite difficult decisions in my case, including whether or not to give up your day job, how to build on that success, assuming it can be built on, because some successes will stand alone. And this is why, you know, sometimes a big commercial success just doesn't seem to be followed up by the author by anything that does particularly well. And this may not be the author's fault, because publishing does like debuts, and it's not so hugely big on second novels.
Did you enjoy writing this, the 10 things about writing? Was it, I mean,
Oh, yes.
because
I enjoy everything I write. I wouldn't write anything if I didn't enjoy it.
Because in your one of your tips is that if you don't enjoy writing what you write, then how do you expect others to do so? I mean,
yes, I do think that's true. And you know, I did for 15 years have a job that I enjoyed. I was a teacher. I loved it. I wouldn't have left it for something that I didn't like doing. But I also think that enjoyment on every part of that learning curve that we're all on is actually really important. The lack of enjoyment in work is something that readers will notice. And this is why some authors who have built a brand and who have written 20 books within that brand can feel their joy kind of beginning to wobble after a while, because they can feel that they're not being sustained by the freshness and the fun of what they were doing 20 years before. And in the same way, somebody who's just starting off, somebody who for some reason wants to write a commercial bestseller and has studied a particular genre and has decided that that's what they're going to do, but they don't secretly really believe it in their heart of hearts. This is why those people don't achieve the success they want, because after a while it will get to readers, and readers are not fooled. And if you're not, I think, building your book from a position of truth and pleasure, however much hard work it can be, then I don't think that the readers will ever really properly be engaged.
It is a wonderful sort of call to arms, this book. It's sort of an encouraging book. It makes you think that, you know, it's sort of it's that you can possibly become a writer, and it's gentle to other writers as well. And there's a wonderful bit at the end of it where you say, remember too, that writing is an act of bravery. You have the courage to do what it takes to give your voice the chance to be heard. Don't do it because you want to be the next J.K. Rowling or Maya Angelou or Margaret Atwood. Those are already taken, which I just thought was wonderful, because there are so many people who think, well, I'm going to sit down and become a writer. And that's just not what it is. You should sit down and then talk.
Yes, absolutely. I think it's quite important for people to understand that being a writer is inseparable from actually writing. There isn't some special magic wand that turns you into a writer. I remember once in New Zealand sitting listening to an author whose name I shall not reveal, but she was a white American successful novelist of a certain type. And she got up on the stage and she said, I suppose that many of you believe that anyone can write a novel. I am here to tell you that not everyone can write a novel. You have to be a special, uniquely talented person to write a novel, and that's why I'm on this stage and you're not. And she said this in front of an actual audience.
Wow.
And I sat there going, oh my God. And in many ways, 10 Things About Writing is a sort of response to my having heard that. And it was a long time ago, and I remember it well, because she was speaking from such a position of success and privilege that, you know, I was just utterly gobsmacked. And so what I'm trying to say is, no, you don't have to be a special, successful, talented person to write a novel. You just have to have something to say and the will to say it, and the humility to learn on the job, because nobody starts off being good. Everybody starts off being terrible, and people just get better. And it is a call for people who don't necessarily have that level of privilege and entitlement to actually feel empowered to let their voices to be heard, because we need more diverse writers. We need people, we need new people. We can't just have the publishing industry publishing the same old people over and over and over again. And they are mostly the same white, privileged, middle class, nicely educated people. We need diverse voices. And you know, it's quite important, I think, to give that message out that, you know, not only do those voices need to be heard, but they can be heard, and they should.
Joanne, thank you so much. It is such an inspiring book. It's a proper call to arms for everybody, and everyone should read it and this particular period and just get cracking on their book. I think it's brilliant.
Absolutely.
Thank you so much for coming on.
It's my pleasure. Thank you.